The key thing is when you look at both sides, China and the US, the chances of a win-win, many analysts believe, exist in some of the areas that are being debated. For example, in the agricultural sector, where the Chinese are seeing higher costs. And this is also the area that is most sensitive to Donald Trump from a political perspective. So there is the sense that something would give, even as we understand that on both sides you have a wide spectrum of inputs. On the US side, for example, you have the hawks like Lighthizer, Navarro, but you also have economic pragmatists like Ross and like Nuching. So although Donald Trump is the key decision maker, he's a bit unpredictable, but clearly he needs to have a win. On the Chinese side, and you can see from the results of Huawei that China is difficult to beat, and they have very strong and robust arguments, and they're very protective of the strength that they already have now, and they're not going to give up easily. And Xi Jinping is seen as an economic nationalist, although there are globalists like the central bank, the Reserve Bank of China boss. He seems to be more of a globalist. There are globalists putting pressure to make changes within the Chinese system, but Xi Jinping, who is the key decision maker, he's not going to concede too much. So there are tensions on both sides, but the view is that this is too important. We're talking about $360 billion worth of goods on both sides, and that tariffs could be taken off on. So it's too important to get wrong, and markets, of course, are optimistic, perhaps because that's the only thing they can be, given the challenges markets have had of recent.
Refresh us a little bit on the main areas of discussion and the latest on where things stand right now.
Well, if you look at both situations, I mean, there are several issues that are being discussed. Of course, the key one is agriculture. Agriculture is an area where there are several opportunities. The Chinese products, for example, Chinese that are buying more agricultural products. The U.S. the soybeans, that area is a huge area for discussion, and we think there could be a win. There's a good chance there, mainly in terms of food and quality standards divergence, and also getting the Chinese to buy more. Other areas include currency manipulation. There is a good chance also of getting some agreement on currency manipulation, essentially because this is not an area where the Chinese have really been very rigid on, particularly of recent. But if you look at forced technology transfer, now, forced technology transfer is an area where they have not even accepted that they are actually doing things that are wrong. And many believe, even if they accept and they introduce any legislation, it's not likely to be far-reaching enough. So the whole issue of compliance or getting enforcement in this area is extremely limited. So it's going to be difficult. So this is an area where many believe very little will happen. The same thing with intellectual property rights, although there is a mixed chance of some progress here, particularly as there is some acceptance, but the Chinese are not going to go very, very far to stop the transfer of property, intellectual property rights that favor them, particularly when we are talking of their own major state-owned enterprises. So again, it's likely to be mixed. In the area of services, talking of loosening of the joint venture requirements in the financial sector and other sectors, again, many believe this could be mixed in terms of the outcomes that we expect, particularly as we see some liberalization on the way. And then with non-tariff barriers, we're looking at unfair support for state-owned enterprises, uneven enforcement of local laws. Where we look at Chinese and foreign companies, we will see some improvement here, but maybe not far enough. So these are essentially the issues that are on the table. But my sense is we are likely to see an issue mainly around enforcement. How do you enforce these laws? And the Chinese, of course, want the U.S. to lift completely all the $250 billion, the tariffs on $250 billion worth of goods, and the US are saying we are going to leave something behind to give us some leverage. But I think it's going to go on for a while. My sense is around April, May, perhaps around May, we should get to a situation where Trump may be able to sign something. But of course, Trump is extremely unpredictable around these issues.
Let's look at the worst case scenario. No resolution or a very, very extended period of dialogue. Who gains? Who loses, Bode?
It's interesting you make that point, because there are winners, clearly, and there will be losers. Obviously, China and the US will lose, particularly when you look at their strong position. But of course, there's so much ahead. That loss may not be as much as many are predicting, even as businesses move out of China, find other places to manufacture or to base their operations so that they have advantages from a tariff perspective. And particularly when you look at economies that are competitive, and if you look at the amounts we're talking about, we're really talking of huge amounts. Those metals and machinery, 250 billion that's coming from China, could easily come from other places, electronics, places like Vietnam, like Malaysia, and Singapore. These are areas where they tend to be more neutral politically. They have a lot of experience. Vietnam is already producing a lot of Huawei phones, for example. So it would be easy for them to do much of the manufacturing from there, so that those tariffs in terms of manufacturing and electronic goods, they don't impact them adversely. So I would say that economies like Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, to some extent South Africa, if they can also improve in terms of their ease of doing business. So where you have the labor capacity, where you have the experience, but particularly with some of the high-tech manufacturing, where the capital can easily flow in and out, and the competitiveness is generally there, you will see again the losers. I think we will get losers. China will struggle definitely, because it would have higher cost, and all this would hurt its economy, even as people pay more for goods. But other losers could be countries like Japan, which are also much smaller. They can't expand their productive capacity, so they wouldn't pick up some of those additional opportunities. But of course, they are part of the supply chain they pay a key part of the supply chain to China. Other countries that are part of that supply chain, like India, but may not be able to accelerate their own capacity to manufacture, may also be adversely impacted. So my sense is the winners will be the more competitive countries that have that slack to produce more within that region. They're already part of the chain. They're already experienced in working with China, and they're essentially set to go, like places like Vietnam and maybe Malaysia.
So a lot of political watchers say that Trump needs a political win. To what extent do you think that his desire to get this political win will drive the U.S.'s position?
Well, politics in the US is quite unpredictable, I think, but my sense is Trump he will tend to do the pragmatic thing. He's not ideological, and he wants something that would give him a narrative that he can spin within the next few months during the political campaign. And this is an area, incidentally, Obama initiated most of this warring in investigations of ZTE, and he essentially latched onto something that had already started. So there is bipartisan support. And if you look at what's happening with Europe, although initially we've seen that they were not quite clear as to where to position themselves in the trade war with look at the Huawei security issue. But we're seeing recently in UK, for example, the regulatory watchdog are now raising concerns about Huawei. So I think very slowly he's making his point. I'm talking of Trump. And he will concede, my guess, particularly in certain areas areas, look away from others where it will be very, very difficult to get any kind of enforcement, like forced technology transfer, and maybe not pay too much attention to other areas like infringement of intellectual property. But the areas that he's likely to focus on are the areas that mean most to his base, and that is the agricultural sector, soybeans, trade, and so on. So I think he will push some kind of win for the U.S. in this area in exchange for releasing the tariffs that have been making life a bit difficult for the Chinese. Of course, both economies are now facing a bit of economic strangulation. The economies are not doing so well. The Chinese have been slowing down for a while, and the recent numbers coming and the data coming out of the US now is even slower than before. So that, I think, should motivate both parties to come together and have a deal, even if it's not exactly the type of deal the market's expecting. There are quick wins that they can quickly do. And of course, we'll have to wait to see what happens. The negotiations that are taking place now are very important.